Hello, hello. Welcome. Thank you for being here, for coming back. You are in the Motherhouse Starter Series, the foundational course for mother law and complicit no more. This is session 5 of this starter series, focused on the lineages of holy resistance within the European Christian tradition, and specifically revolutionary women. Hopefully y'all have been with us in this series, so you know what this Motherhouse Starter Series is all about, mother law and complicit no more, and the relationships and movement context that it comes from. Before we get started and dive in, we also just want to acknowledge all of those who might be impacted by the hurricane in the southeastern United States, as well as the current and ongoing attacks on Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria. For us, the work we are doing here is about understanding and uprooting the causes, the root causes of the polycrises we face, including the climate crisis and imperialism. So thank you for being here and being part of this work. We are Land Justice Futures, and we work with movement partners and religious communities to create land transitions rooted in ecological and racial healing. We seek to heal stories on sacred lands, to liberate land and relationships from colonial constraints in service of life. You can learn more about our work, our focus community program, and our public educational offerings about land justice from our website. And just to say it briefly, we're here together for this Motherhouse Starter Series to springboard our own remembering, to reclaim our authority and the mother law that lives within the seeds of our own cultures and lineages. As our advisor, Pat McCabe, would say, we're here to put life at the center of all we do and to start living toward right relationship right now. Just a few housekeeping reminders about the series as a whole. This week is a turning point in this series as we round towards close, a temporary close, a closure moment. From here, we move from basic understanding about the ways of domination that we inherit and move towards resourcing ourselves for the work of complicit no more and mother law. Today, we'll learn about the lineage of holy resistance by European Christian women, specifically Bridget, Hildegard, and Teresa of Avila. And next week, we'll explore what it means to remother our theology with a womanist theologian and focus on the Magnificat. Then, after that, we will be closing with praxis, that is, integrating theory and our real lives, and really initiating a cycle of learning, action, and reflection, which then leads to deeper learning, new action, refined reflection. To give more time for metabolizing and integrating the series, as well as moving towards applying it into our own lives, we are offering an extra pop-up 1-hour session on Indigenous Peoples Day, specifically to support our moving towards complicit no more. So that is this first one you see here on October 14th. It'll be an hour of mostly small group discussion space.
Samsung one there.
Oh, sorry, thank you. So that will be mostly breakout space, where you will get to choose your own breakout group based on the kind of processing you want to do. So if you want to discuss the content of the sessions, if you want to discuss the impact on you personally, if you want to have space to grapple with spiritual or cultural lineage, a space for ideating what's next for complicit no more, you can kind of choose your own adventure, and hopefully get more into what does this mean in my own life. And after that, 2 weeks later, we will formally close out this starter series with Michelle Shenandoah, our primary partner in this work, in this initiative, with Complicit No More, what it means to be moving towards right action. And in that space, we'll be kind of initiating this new movement moment, and doing so with a commitment to action and real personal dedication. And in terms of the usual logistics, excuse me, for today, today we're going to be switching up the format to allow for more processing of this series thus far. We'll begin with some remembering and move into small groups pretty quickly. We'll have time for large group discussion before we dig in to the new with Katie Gordon, who will be speaking to us about lineages of holy resistance. Since we are starting with breakouts, please rename yourself with the letter B at the start of your name on Zoom if you want to be put into a BIPOC only caucus space. If you have trouble with that, again, please direct message Amy in the chat. And if you don't want to be in a breakout, you can just not accept your assigned breakout room and stay muted in the large room. Everyone else will be randomly grouped into groups of 4 or 5. And of course, we invite you to deepen through outside discussions with people you are in community with. As always, you can find most of what you need on our course page, replays of sessions, homework, community guidelines, etc. That link should be here on the screen and in the chat. And other than that, please stay on mute unless we're in breakouts or inviting larger discussion. And if you have any questions during the sessions, you can direct chat Amy. And again, a request to be mindful of the chat so that we aren't distracting from our speakers. And if there are resources you're really excited to share, please email them to us at hello@landjusticefutures.org, and we will try to include it in the follow-up. And that's also the email that you can use for any other questions. All right, with that, I think that I am going to be passing it over to my friend and sister, Brittany, who is going to lead us in a little moment of bringing ourselves in the recap.
Thanks, Sarah. Can everybody hear me? See me? So we just, and can we go ahead and stop screen share of the slides? There we go. Hi, and maybe unpin everybody so we can just see each other in gallery view. Can you go ahead and do that? So let's not spotlight me. I want to see everybody here. Great. Can everybody see each other's faces in the upper right hand? You can click gallery view. We just wanted to create some space to be together as a group of people who are endeavoring to take this learning on. I first just want to say thank you. Thank you for sticking with this. Thank you for making not just the time, but the space for what it is that we're trying to take on together in your own life. And we're going to have, as Sarah said, time to be in small groups. But we first wanted to just have a kind of collective moment to, we're over halfway through this course. We're about halfway. And so we wanted to invite you to say in your own words, like, what is it that you are learning or seeing? And the way that we thought about asking, since we don't have 7 hours for a large group open mic with 200 people, we're leaning on the wonderful resource of poetry. Any of you know John Paul Lederach's work? He's does a lot of important peacemaking work in really really complex conflict zones. And he says that the haiku is a spiritual practice that he uses really in order to presence ourselves to the simplest truth of what it is that we're seeing or experiencing. So we're going to go into that haiku practice together. We're going to give you 4 minutes. Sarah, is that still right? About 4 minutes? Yeah. To write a haiku in the chat. If you don't know what a haiku is, it's a poem. It's a 3-line poem. 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables. Um, the point here, I had a really wonderful writing professor once who said, good writing is all filet mignon, no ground chuck. Which is to say, don't worry so much about the numbers, but they are a creative constraint to say, what is the essence of what you've been learning? What is the essence of what's been alive in you? So it's through that discipline of the syllable practice that we're going to lean on to get to a sense of presence and truth, what's alive in us and what we've been learning. There's no wrong answers. And but we really do want to hear from you and hear from each other here. So we're going to take 4 minutes and invite you to write and share when you're ready. Thank you. If we can come back to each other's faces here. If you're still finishing yours, no worries. Just stay doing what you are doing. And I'm just going to give us 30 seconds to look at what's in the chat. And just see if there's one other line that resonates or shimmers to you that someone else is saying. So let's all just take a quiet moment here in the chat to reach for each other. If you're still typing, just hang on to it. Don't send it so that the chat can be still. It's just pause sending anything for the next 30 seconds and spend time with each other's words. Maybe you find something that calls to you, and when you do, just pause there. Spend time with those words, that person. There's so much wisdom here. There's so many ways that we know how to metabolize this. Blessings on each of you and each of us as we continue to do that work. We're going to hop back to the left brain and zoom out. Sarah's going to help us make sense of, oh yeah, where have we come? But we just wanted to make sense for the deeper knowing to surface, because that's the foundation that we're standing on and what matters. Sarah.
Yeah. Part of me is like, let's throw out the plan and just read the chat. That's
we could take more time here. And anyway, you're the boss.
I think, I just want to name, there is so much wisdom here about what we have been in, what has been real amongst us and within us and around us in this series. And these words are going to be really helpful, I think, and we will make sure to share them out with you as an artifact of our learning together, and as a touchstone that can help guide us. For those who might also benefit from a little bit of a catching our breath in the world of content and where we've been, and maybe for those who might have skipped a session or had to miss a session, we'll just spend a couple of minutes here reviewing a little bit of the headlines of these first 4 sessions. Just that way we can really be weaving into this new moment as we turn. Oh, and we're seeing your whole screen, Amy. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
You have a very clean screen. I'm very impressed.
I'm trying over here.
So going all the way back to our first session together. In session 1, with Michelle Shenandoah and of Rematriation, Oneida Wolf Clan, and with Mama Bear, who is a Mohawk Bear Clan mother. We learned about mother law and the two-row wampum. Here, this picture, you can see the women's nomination belt, and then right there underneath it, the two-row wampum. And we learned from them, our core partners in this initiative and originators of Mother Law and Complicit No More. And we learned about where these ideas come from. We learned about the matrilineal society of the Haudenosaunee, a confederacy of 6 nations with a tradition of democracy that goes back over 1,000 years. We learned how in Haudenosaunee tradition, authority is vested in the elder women of their clan, their tribe, their nation, and their confederacy of nations, as these women are the life bearers and bringers that sustain the people. As such, decisions about sovereignty and land, peace and war, leadership must pass through the elder women at all levels. While the US Constitution was very much inspired by the Haudenosaunee with ideas like federalism and bicameral Congress and 3 branches of government, these things that Mama Bear and Michelle were talking about, the US ignored really crucial components of the Great Law of Peace and the critical authority that women had in maintaining and guiding that system of law and decision-making for the land and for the people. We also learn about one of the earliest agreements to be made between Indigenous nations and European colonists, the two-row wampum. In that treaty, colonists and the Haudenosaunee agreed to live side by side, each in their own boats, colonists in their ship and the Haudenosaunee in their canoes, respecting and not interfering with each other's laws, peoples, and customs, but going down the river of life with principles of peace, friendship, and forever. And like all treaties, the two-row wampum should be treated as supreme law of the land, but it clearly was not. After the session, you were invited to reflect on the image of the two-row and to sketch the story across time and imagine into the future, the original agreement, what actually happened, and what could be moving forward. In session 2, moving towards the next week, we learned about the doctrine of discovery and its dehumanizing impacts on all peoples. Amy, can we advance the slide one more? Thank you. There we are. There's Sarah Augustine. In session 2, we learned about the doctrine of discovery and its dehumanizing impacts on all peoples, colonizer and colonized. And we learned specifically the disproportionate impact on Indigenous and Black communities who have been dispossessed, colonized, and enslaved. Sarah Augustine made the doctrine of discovery very real in today's terms through her own life as an Indigenous woman and the way that it touches her every day. And kind of on the more, practical note, we learned that the doctrine of discovery is an active legal doctrine that underpins the system of sovereignty and land title in the United States and in many other nations that were colonized all around the world, from Suriname to the Philippines. This legal doctrine originates from a series of papal bulls that we know of now, or letters from the Pope, which compelled European nations to invade, capture, and vanquish all non-Christians, and to subdue them into perpetual servitude. These papal bulls served as the legal, moral, spiritual, and political justification for the transatlantic slave trade, the genocide of Indigenous peoples, and by 1914, the colonization of 84% of the land on Earth by European nations. Beyond being legal precedent, the doctrine of discovery is an ideology of conquest and dehumanization, a policy structure that has impacts on every level, and that we see here and around the world in terms of poverty, incarceration, families broken up by the state, lower life expectancy, poor health outcomes, homelessness, addiction, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on, specifically for Black and Indigenous communities. After this session, you were invited to do some treaty research on the land you live on or do an audit of a popular song or story to see how does the doctrine show up in our everyday culture. And then in session 3, we focused on land and our relationship with land. We learned about how the doctrine became a tool. Amy, can we go one more? Thank you. We learned about how the doctrine became a tool for land theft, particularly used against Black and Indigenous communities. We learned from 2 lawyers who've been doing this work for years and who have been led by Indigenous and Black teams and communities in the struggle for land justice. And we learned about the ways in which the US government and settlers have taken land by force or treachery through legal and extra legal means. And we learned about how today the land distribution is so grotesquely unjust, that 98% of private rural land and 95% of private urban land are currently owned by white people in the United States. We also tapped into the damaging effect of this doctrine on our relationship and how we objectify and commodify the mystery of creation that sustains life. After the session, you were invited to watch a short cartoon on the pathologies of home ownership from our friend Janelle Orsi, and do some personal research on your family's relationship to land. You also had the option to do an extended version of the embodied curiosity and unknowing exercise that Bronte had led us in. And last week, in session 4, we began to weave all of this together with how it's connected to the rise of European patriarchy and the witch hunts, how those things are part of the doctrine underpinning colonization. And we tapped into what Pat McCabe calls an archetypal wounding of humanity that set the course for so much more. With Max Dashu and Sarah Jelena Walcott, we learned how the doctrine of discovery evolved out of much older processes initiated by the church. Processes of empire, of stomping out land-based religions, and the control of women's bodies. This doctrine did not come out of nowhere, but a long trajectory. We learned how many of the same ideologies, narratives, and strategies used by the church and state to demonize and own and control women's bodies were then used on Black and Indigenous bodies around the world for the sake of extraction, theft, and empire. We also learned how the witch hunts systematically crushed commoner resistance to the enclosure of common lands in Europe and eradicated the last vestiges of female authority outside of the church and state. Here we see the patterns of conquest, forced conversion, land theft, and enslavement, which set up our current system. And after the last week's session, you were invited to listen to the song, The High Woman, and go through a reflection exercise on one of the stories of the women in that song. You also had the option to read a draft of our introductory essay to this campaign, A Call for Mother Law. So that brings us to now. That's a lot to bring us up to. And we just want to recognize that it's important to have some space for really catching up with ourselves. So hopefully this moment of haiku, this moment of kind of remembering for ourselves where we've been this last month has kind of refreshed your memories, our memories, and is allowing whatever has been most salient or powerful for you to rise to the surface. With that, we are going to move into some small groups. Brittany, are you still game to do this part?
Yes.
Great.
Thanks, Sarah. We've been through a lot, y'all. We've been through a lot. We've covered a lot of ground. And now we're going to have time to talk about it. So the prompt is really simple. We're going to invite each of you to share a story, a moment, either from the course or from the homework that you did, a story of how you're making sense of this series, how this work is landing for you, or what's coming alive in you. So think about either a moment in the series where something really came online for you or was really meaningful, or in doing the homework, any one of the 4 homeworks that we've done so far. If you don't want to be in a breakout group, just don't accept the invite. If you are a person of color and you want to be with other people of color, the B in front of your name. And if you're having trouble with that, just chat Amy. She will help you. Otherwise, just accept that prompt to go into a breakout room. And the way that we're going to do this, we're going to have 20 minutes, and we're actually just going to take turns for a full share from each person. So 2 or 3 minutes of a share. Again, using an insight from a piece of homework or a moment in the course. We have our longer guidelines up on our course, but just a reminder to be mindful of how much time. Make sure that people have equal terms. And with this breakout, it might be good to have a timekeeper. Remember that active listening isn't just an agreement, but that can be as powerful of a role in this work together. So engage in it in that way. And as always, step up into sharing more, or maybe stepping into a listening role, depending on what you're usually used to. And we always honor the confidentiality and consent of everybody in the group. I'm going to actually ask that we take a minute now before you open the breakouts, Amy, just for everybody to think, and maybe we can go back to that prompt. So go ahead and think through that tour of learning that Sarah just gave us. What is one insight from the homework or from in or outside of the course? What's a story that you want to tell?
Welcome back, everyone. Actually, I'm going to remove my spotlight here. All right. Yes, there's the full group. Hope that was scratching an itch for some more integration time, some more conversation about the series thus far. We want to make some space, not too much, but a little bit of space for folks to have the opportunity to really considering what has been shared in your group and what's been rising to the surface. If there are any gifts that ought to be shared to this large group of 175 people that feel like they're actually learning for the whole. I'd love to invite a couple of hands. I also want to invite folks from our theological council, especially to raise their hands if there's bits from your conversation that really feel like it's in service for this whole group here, for them to be shared. So I'm going to give us a minute here for folks to name. And I see Rosa, your hand up. Kayla, I think your hand is still up from before, but Rosa, let's begin with you.
Very quickly, in going over all of this, the question of where did this really start, and seeing Doctrine of Discovery, I was thinking, but did it really start there? I mean, as a Catholic, history tells me perhaps it started with Constantine and that whole mess of Christianity becoming the official religion. And then I thought deeper, and I thought, you know what? There are some gospels that are left out of the Bible, the Christian Bible, and that we're not supposed to read them. And one of them is the Gospel of Mary. And in that Gospel of Mary, there's a little piece where Peter is just torn apart, because his question is it possible that the Savior, that Jesus, the Messiah, the Anointed One, loved her more than us and talked to her before he talked to us. And I thought, there it is. There it is. Is it possible that the woman had the message of resurrection and new life before the men did? How could this be?
Ooh. Thank you, Rosa, for weaving in the Gospel of Mary. Yes. And yeah, I think there's a lot of points that which we could draw back to.
Yes.
Constantine definitely being one of them. Thank you for lifting that up. Pat, thank you for being here. Welcome back home. What do you got?
Thank you. It's good to be here. I think that's an interesting question. Did it begin with the doctrine of discovery? And I say no. There was a lot that led up to that. That was like I don't know, getting the act together, but not in a great way moment, it feels like. But you asked in the email if there was any scripture that kind of struck me, and as some of you know, I was raised in the church for the first 14 years of my life, and then later went into indigenous ceremonial spiritual life. But I think when I think about it, so this is a supremacy. This is a one part of humanity claiming a supremacy. And so what I remember about growing up with the Bible and the Bible stories was that there were so many instances of different groups calling upon divine power to aid in their supremacy for whatever their cause was in one way or another, right? And so and then sometimes there was a little bit of narrative given around why God favored this group and help them overcome the other group, right? So yeah, just really thinking about it in terms of that supremacy. And I was telling this little story to the group that I had just come back from Japan, but and we were in Hiroshima, and it really had an impact on me because the atomic bomb was every year in a field trip in Albuquerque, we used to go to the atomic museum, and they had these replicas of Fat Man, which was one of the bombs, and all I was taught about that was that that made us the biggest, baddest kids on the block, and nobody could mess with us. And that's all I was really thought about it. But of course, being in Hiroshima, I thought about all the history I have here in New Mexico related to the development of the atomic bomb, my own people's being put into uranium mining, not really understanding the long-term effects, although the people who had us doing that did understand. But again, we were considered subhuman. We were actually mining uranium with our bare hands.
Oh,
So that was playing out that way. But I guess I'll just get to this point where I was able to say this to my Japanese hosts, but I also had to apologize for my own people's role in World War II, in which the bomb was dropped, because the Japanese kept breaking the code, the US military codes. And so they resorted to calling on my people specifically to use our language and encode it. And the Japanese were unable to break that code. And so at one point in my visit there, I found myself kneeling before a woman who had survived the bomb being dropped on her home of Hiroshima. She happened when she was 6. She was 86 when we met, and I had to apologize to her on behalf of my people for our role in the atrocity that took place there. And since then, I've just been feeling the ancient culture of Japan, the ancient culture, my own ancient culture, who for millennia had been developing some knowledge of how to be that omnibeneficent human presence on the planet in alignment and harmonizing with Earth. But that supremacy way also swept us up into that current. And so a part of my ceremony there was to reclaim the sanctity of our sacred language that has the power to restore Like that's its primary power, is to restore beauty and harmony.
Mm.
And I reclaimed the sanctity of the sacred gourd, because that was the code word for bomb in our language that was used. So this reclamation out of this supremacy, which I'll link back to the doctrine of discovery, but there's spiritual historical work that needs to be done, but I'm just really feeling all the different ways in which this idea of a divine supremacy and moral authority has woven and continues to grab members.
Hmm.
And we like to think that Indigenous peoples are apart from that, but I had my moment where I had to acknowledge, no, we at some point we offered up our language for this purpose.
Hmm.
So yeah, just watching how it moves. Yeah.
Thank you, Pat, for weaving in that complexity. And yeah, I'm just really with the use of the word gourd, of a life-giving plant, to be code for a bomb. And yeah, that's just really, really hitting me. I think we have time for maybe two more hands. Curious if other folks, Bronte, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I was really struck by Pat's testimony, and was also struck by someone in the chat. I'm just trying to look for their name again. Margaret McCaslin's haiku. They wrote, "A split ash basket held myself and then my child." Appropriation. And was just sharing about this, or just, and thank you, Margaret, for that haiku. And was just really feeling into the tenderness of being born into this basket, and also carrying your child in this basket, and also it being a stolen tenderness. I was sharing in the theological council of these sites of memory that are also sites of violence, and the ways that so much beauty takes place in that is also subject to and made that we can access beauty through terror, and just that sort of presence, a presence to that, responsibility to that. And yeah, was thinking in through Pat's story about where I was born in Fort Benning, Georgia, at the site where the School of Americas took place, and the site that trained people to do so much terror of the American empire. And that sort of that exchange of tenderness and violence is just something I'm with throughout this our time together. And I think the mother brings that up for me, of both this beauty of bearing and bringing life into this world, and also just this and labor, and like that the work that we're doing together is both like so powerful and beautiful, and it is laborious, and it's going to take time, and it's going to be painful. And I'm just with I'm with that thread. And I wanted to share that I saw I was reading the other day, since in the apocryphal book of Saint James, that Mary is spinning yarn as when the angel Gabriel comes to her to let her know that, yeah, that she's badass and she is divine and chosen. Um, and I saw that Nancy on the call, someone named Nancy, was spinning yarn while we were in this conversation. I just, something about this spinning, that she's actually spinning the thread of the garment of the temple. And there's just something, I don't know, there's something just really powerful to me about that I wanted to just bring into the space of these sort of this beauty and this craft that is with us, and also like through making beauty, like when we're available to be contacted by the divine for our purpose, for liberation, that when we're in these sort of maternal, motherly craft, just find that really powerful. I'll pass it back to the center.
Thank you, Bronte, and for helping us weaving like the present power of gathering, and like the spinning that's happening over here, the reading that's happening over here, the haiku that's like that we are in the labor and we're in the gift of this. And I feel like you just spoke to that so powerfully, among so many other things. Molly, I think you'll be the last one for now.
Thank you, Sarah, so much, and thank you all. And what has struck me so powerfully and so emotionally is the space in which we can feel and understand and accept that we are heartbroken. We are So I start crying when I say that. We are heartbroken over what appears to be and what has been done by humans. Ourselves, that's who we are. And my existential question is, how good are we? And that is what comes to me in the moment of you're enabling us to lament and to grieve what has been done here. And it seems, and it certainly is to me over these last years, the importance of naming what has been done, that white patriarchy, genocide, hierarchy, empire, it's deeply important so that we can grasp in some way, but the larger context you've created, and then the heartbreakedness of where and how we must grapple and suffer and be able to move forward in a full faith that people are good. Thank you for letting me say that.
Thank you, Molly. Yeah, and with that, I just want to acknowledge, like, yeah, the heartbreak is in the present. It's really, I feel it in this room. I feel it when we work with sisters in land justice, and it's so important to name those things and acknowledge those things. I mean, the things that are happening currently. I mean, there are genocides happening right now as we speak that are a product of what we are studying. There is climate catastrophe happening as we speak that is a product of what has unfolded that we are studying here. And that's a lot, and we need to be resourced in order to face it. We need to be connected in order to face it. And I think this is the part of the turn of this course, is how can we resource? What can we pull from in our own world, in our own lives, in our own lineages that support that turning and facing, that moving away from complicity with this system and moving towards mother law. So with that, I'm gonna invite us to shake out a little bit, do a little reach and stretch and breathe, because we're gonna switch gears. Yeah. Thank you everyone for this beautiful sharing, from the haikus to your small groups and just now. We are going to move forward in our session today. And with that, I'll name today, we are going to be asking, who are the women within the European Christian tradition whose commitments to God inspired a subversion of the patriarchal empire and a oneness with creation? Today we'll draw inspiration and courage and instruction from 3 foundresses and saints in the Catholic tradition. Brigid, Hildegard, and Teresa of Avila, who were a living resistance in the midst of their own context of empire, you know, with all the caveats of in their own context. And we examine what we might share with them, as well as the unfinished work that is ours to continue as we move towards mother law and being complicit no more. So with that, I am going to bring up Katie, my friend. Oh, and I guess I'll add me too. Hi, Katie. Thank you for being here. Katie Gordon is a dear friend of Land Justice Futures, and by way of short bio, she is a spiritual seeker who has found community among the Benedictine Sisters of Erie, the Sisters and Monks and Friends in Erie, Pennsylvania, land of the Haudenosaunee, along the beautiful Lake Erie. And Katie organizes spaces for study and experience of monastic spirituality as the coordinator for the online global monastery, Monasteries of the Heart. She also teaches Catholic spirituality at Mercyhurst University, serves on the Stewardship Council of the Formation Project, and is one of the co-founders of Nuns and Nuns, which is how we came to be. Katie also writes a Substack called Following the Monastic Impulse, in which she seeks to expand our imagination of how we live into the monastic tradition today and into the future. Thank you, Katie, for being here. I'm so excited. This is such a moment for me personally, to be welcoming you to this stage, if you will.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for inviting me into this conversation, and for all of you who have created this conversation. I've been participating over the last month, and I'm grateful for the depth with which everyone is showing up to this work. And you know, as I'm beginning, before I begin to share the stories of these three women, I want to take the kind of a framing. I think Molly was just offering us that we're in this necessary stage of lament right now. And I'm reminded of something Brian Massingale said at the LCWR gathering this past summer, the Leadership Conference of Women Religious. And he argued that we need to lament in order to one day be able to welcome in new life and to see new life as a gift. And so I want to just underline that importance of the way that we're moving through this process, and also honoring, while I'm shifting us toward uplifting these stories that I think we can be proud of and we can lean on for support today. We are not simply moving past and leaving behind what we've been exploring these last few weeks, but we're carrying those truths with us, while also bringing up this other truth that exists that we can hold and find the wholeness and the strength in that integration of the both and of what this journey is. And so I hope we can all in this shift hold both truths of what these stories offer us and the reality of what the Catholic Church has been in the world today. And I think in setting that up, I was thinking about this audience mostly of Catholic sisters, and how sisters really, I think, intuitively understand this both andness through your own lives lived in a church, for your own selves as powerful women existing within a church that has not always recognized the full power of women. There is this way where you inherently are also living on this, what Richard Rohr calls the edge of the inside, that you're not necessarily a part of the tower of leadership or of the hierarchy, but you're actually just on the ground. And by being on the ground, it's actually a more fruitful place because you can touch the ground, you can feel what's happening, you can feel the pulse of the world, and you can reach out and reach in a way that those in the hierarchy are disconnected from. And so I hope that we can use our locations on the edge of the inside as a fertile, creative place to be creating these bridges that can build in a new story of how we belong to each other. So these women that I'll be uplifting today are a few exemplars of this lineage of holy resistance. They're from 3 different European contexts across 3 different eras. And within their own realities and limitations, they struggled toward their own courageous leadership. So they can help us imagine how to do so today. And these 3 women are foundresses, a word that matters very much to me, and I know to many of you. While the Catholic Church history uplifts men's leadership and men's words and men's policies, there is another history that has always existed that women religious communities are deeply aware of, and that's the history of women's leadership and particularly foundresses. And what we find in foundresses is that they never work alone. They are women who create in community and who heal the broken society around them and in themselves. And so 3 women who are foundresses in this regard, Bridget of Kildare, Hildegard of Bingen, and Teresa of Avila, are who we'll be exploring today. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with these women, but I hope to today, through sharing a few specific stories about each of them, and importantly, by asking specific questions out of their lives, we can come to see their lives in a new way around the questions that we're holding around decolonizing the traditions we've inherited, around matriarchal lineages that already exist within our histories, and around ways that we can remove our consent from harmful institutions and put that consent back into ourselves and into each other and into our communities. So I won't be able to tell the whole story of each of these women, but rather give you a glimpse of who each of these women are. And another last note is that I arrived to this not necessarily as a scholar or historian, but really as a seeker myself. I have lived in a Benedictine monastery, as Sarah said, for the last 5 years. And as you might suspect, we talk about these women. They live with us in a way. They are our lineage. The day I moved in, I participated in a Bridget retreat as Benedictines. Hildegard comes up a lot. And in my own reading, Teresa of Avila has been a favorite of mine. And so these are stories I've learned about women from the women that I know. They are what I've come to understand is a feminist monastic living tradition that is alive well in history and alive well today. So with all of that, I will begin to share these stories. I will walk through a few stories, offer a few reflection questions. I'll pause for a moment with those questions, knowing there's not time to really sit with each one today, but the slides will be shared with you after. So if there's a question you want to return to, you'll have the opportunity to do so later. So to begin, we'll first look toward, we're going chronological, so we'll start with Bridget of Kildare. The saint images that I have put on these slides, by the way, are called the Modern Saints by Gracie. She's an artist who brings these ancient figures into our contemporary consciousness by embodying them in a particular way, particularly modern way. And I thought for this question that we're asking of what are these women saying to us right now, these were the right images for us to consider. So Bridget of Kildare lived in Ireland in the 5th and 6th century. She was an early monastic foundress and abbess, an early leader of Christian communities in Ireland. Her story, just to clarify, is intertwined with the stories of the goddess Bridge. And so what we know of Bridget of Kildare is inextricable with the stories and the mythologies around the goddess Bridge as well. And so just to recognize that this is a woven history with pagan and Celtic spiritualities and stories that we make sense of today. The women that I took a retreat from, Anne McCarthy and Edwina Gately, called Bridget of Kildare a patron saint of the threshold, which I thought was a really beautiful way of understanding who she was. She held both the Celtic, the pagan spiritualities, and the Christian faith, both in her own life. And the legend also holds that Bridget was born in the doorway of a barn at dawn. So she has sat always at this threshold between light and dark, inside and outside, winter and spring. There's so much about her life and example that sets us right at this crossroads. And like us, she was living in a time of significant transformation. This is early Christian empire spreading to her own land in Ireland. And to borrow the line from Pope Francis, she was living in a time that was not an era of change, but a change of era. There are a few stories from her life to uplift. So she, as I said, was a woman of the land, was rooted in a very earth-based elemental spirituality. They wove together both the Celtic, the pagan practices, as well as Christian beliefs. She used the elements in her rituals greatly. There was an eternal flame, a sacred fire that burned in Kildare in pre-Christian times that was tended by priestesses who gathered on the hill of Kildare. And so Bridget and her sisters took over this tending of the flame in their era as well. So they were fire tenders. And they also tended to the water. So there are wells across Kildare and across Ireland today still that are dedicated to Bridget and fed by underground springs. And they are used as sacred waters and rites for blessings today. And she founded a monastery of both women and men called a dual monastery. It became a thriving monastic city. And while cities are historically named for men, she called the city, named it for an oak tree. Kildare or Kildara meant the Church of the Oak. So she centered and celebrated and revered the natural world in all that she did. And she remained deeply connected to the land throughout her leadership in her community. There is another story of Bridget that goes like this. When Bridget was asked the king for land to build her abbey, he said that she could have as much land as her cloak could cover. And it is said a miracle occurred. She unfurled her cloak and it spread wide across the plain, claiming all land for her vision of peace and care. Now, I think I'm conscious of the way that land is treated as a commodity through this conversation that we've been having. I think there's an interpretation that she unfurled her cloak and claimed it for herself. But that is not of the spirit of who Bridget was. So I want to tell one more story that will help us, I think, understand how she relates to ownership, not as something that is a private ownership, but taking stewardship, really, of something to share in common. It is said that she said, "What's mine is theirs." She would give things away often throughout her life, including the milk from her father's cows. And while the concern was that, well, what if there's not enough for everyone? There was always enough for everyone. And so she really lived by this model, this principle of abundance in her life. And finally, she moved from a place of spiritual authority. Another story tells us that a bishop ordained her a bishop in her time. It is said, there are versions of this, it is said that the spirit overcame him and the words that he uttered made Bridget into a bishop. She held this position throughout her life and then passed it on to the future abbesses in her community. Eventually, a synod put an end to the matriarchal line of leadership, but her, in her own time, and her community continued this tradition in which a legitimate line of bishop leadership existed in the women of this community, in this place. So as Bridget reminds us to return to the land and to reimagine ritual, there are a few reflection questions we can ask ourselves. What elemental or earthy spiritualities and celebrations are you called to keep, to tend the flame of your most authentic and whole spiritual life? Is there some aspect of your lineage with the earth that you can recover through ritual? What does her all-encompassing cloak-covered land model for us in imagining decolonial futures? If we were given the ear of someone in power about the fate of some land, whose vision would we center? And what matriarchal lineages exist in your community, in your family, in your tradition? Are there new rituals, or perhaps old rituals, that you're called to create to instill this spiritual authority in one another? Trusting those questions, we'll find another moment to reflect on. We'll turn now to Hildegard of Bingen. Several centuries later, we turn to Germany and to the 12th century, to the medieval ages. Hildegard was a mystic, a visionary. She became one of the 4 women who were doctors of the church. She was a Benedictine abbess, a leader sought out for her spiritual counsel by countless people in the region, in the greater region. She had a reputation for wisdom. And she was a prolific creator and writer. She wrote of her visions that she had since the age of 4. She wrote about healing plants and natural remedies. And she wrote 78 musical compositions, including what is considered the first morality play set to music. So she was an incredible creator, creative force, both in her community and for the monasteries that she led, but also in so many works beyond that. Hildegard believed in something called viriditas. She spoke to something called viriditas, which is this greening force. So throughout her life, when she wrote on everything from the medicinal healing to her understanding of the way that spirit is alive in the world today, she was speaking of viriditas, this greening verdancy, a creative, spirit-driven force driving life forward, making it ever green, ever moist, ever just filled. A prayer that she had is this: O most honored greening force, you who roots in the sun, you who lights up in shining serenity, within a wheel that earthly excellence fails to comprehend, you are enfolded in the weaving of divine mysteries. You redden like the dawn, and you burn, flame of the sun. So she too, like Bridget, was incredibly earthy in her spirituality. She would preach justice. She, at the age of 60, began the first of 4 extensive preaching tours, preaching reform to the church and to clergy especially. So at a time when women did not necessarily have the freedom of movement, she indeed did, and she moved throughout her region along the Rhine preaching. And she also wrote an extensive correspondence with church and political leaders, addressing the topics that she could, particularly would address the abuse of power and clericalism when priests took advantage of people of faith, particularly around indulgences, when people of faith were being taken advantage of financially by priests. She would call them out in letter and call them into a different way of relating to their roles in leadership. And she took risks throughout her life and up until the end. So at 80, she endured her most severe conflict with the church when a young man asked to be buried in the monastery cemetery. He had previously been excommunicated, but had reconciled with the church. But the local church still believed him to be excommunicated and demanded that his bones be exhumed. Hildegard refused. Instead, she and the sisters hid the grave, so it could not be identified, so the bones could not be exhumed. And the church then placed her community under interdict, which denied them the sacraments and it denied them the right to sing the divine office. And this was something, the sacraments, singing, chanting, was so essential and core to the spirituality, to the monastic spirituality of Hildegard and her community. But Hildegard did not let up on her commitment to believe that this young man deserved a place to be buried. And so she continued to write letters, and eventually the interdict was lifted. Hildegard died shortly after that. But she, along with her community, continued to stand for an inclusion of God's love for all people in a way that the church was not. So in her risking her own authority and preaching truth, the reflection questions we can ask from her life. She often spoke truth to power through letters and public preaching. What injustice do you feel called to address in your writing or preaching? And what greater vision or purpose would you call them toward? She was dedicated to creating a spirit of independence in her monasteries, rather than submitting to the immoral or unjust decisions of male clergy. Are you willing to take this risk? Why or why not? What might you lose by risking, and what might you gain? She modeled in her very being the greening verdancy of Viriditas through her wildly creative life. What new life might be ready to flow from within you and your community? And one more figure to turn to is Teresa of Avila. Born in Spain in the 16th century, and she lived in another time of significant transformation of eras from one into another. So Teresa was a foundress and really a refounder, a reformer of an order called the Discalced Carmelites. Discalced meaning without shoes. So she was a reformer to religious life that returned her orders to the value of simplicity or austerity, modified by that discalced word. She lived a very embodied spirituality. You can see this famous sculpture of her in ecstasy, in prayer. This comes from a vision that she had where an angel with an arrow struck her heart, and she just experienced this outflow of ecstasy through that vision. So she was really someone in her body and writing from that place of being in her body. As I said, she was born into a change of era, sort of century, and it was one that was marked by human brutality, by religious wars, the Protestant Reformation, and the early westward colonization. Just to set her into time a little more specifically, she was born 23 years after Christopher Columbus's first voyage, and 23 years after the fall of Granada, which marked the end of this interfaith city where Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived together. And when Granada and other cities fell, Jews and Muslims were expelled from Spain. This, we can see, really played a role, I think, in her spirituality. She was born 10 years after Spain's transatlantic slave trade began. Born two years before Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the door. So 2 years before this significant moment in the Protestant Reformation. And when she wrote her autobiography in 1562, there were violent wars of religion just beginning in France, where they would rage on for 25 years to come for the rest of her life. And so all around her, she saw church and state in the midst of violence and war and oppression and hatred of people. this human brutality on an increasingly global transcontinental scale. And we have to think that she was aware of that in her own spiritual life. And it is recognized that she comes from a family history of converts, she herself being possibly a conversa, a convert. We know that her uncle converted from Judaism to Christianity after the fall of Granada. And the process of conversion was very shame-filled and very control-oriented by the church, and very traumatic experience. She doesn't talk about it directly, or nor do we know what her direct experience is, but her uncle, we know, was a convert. And so there is a family line of sorts that we can understand her family comes from. And so a few stories from her life. She lived in the midst of the Inquisition and in pretty extreme censorship by the church. So throughout her life, the Catholic Church was censoring ideas, was banning books. The index is something that was used to try to control culture. She would be trying to read and grow spiritually, and the books that she was looking for could not be found. But this was a project that the church exercised in order to essentially control culture, to control what people viewed as the Catholic faith. And they would remove books that were not consistent with their political projects. But still, in the midst of that, she became a writer, a prolific writer. She was encouraged by her confessor to write her story, her autobiography, to write her prayer method, to share it with sisters and with others. She wrote in vernacular, meaning Spanish, her own language, rather than Latin, in a time when that too was banned. And her books were often investigated by the church. And one of her confessors, it is said, asked her to burn her book. And so she did, in front of him, burn her own book, knowing that there were many more copies in the library. So she was always navigating this tension between power of her own voice. It seems that she really trusted her own voice because she wrote and shared so much of it, and still navigated the power structure of the Catholic Church in which she was. Teresa, through her mystical experiences throughout her life, including when she was sick, really had an understanding of God, that God was within. That was a place through her mystical experiences where this belief was reinforced. So she believed fiercely in the teaching that we are all made in the image of God, and she took that very seriously. So she took that to mean that God is within each of us, that if we are made in the image of God, we do not need to seek God outside of ourselves. We merely need to turn inward. So God is not apart, but God is within, and we have access to God through our own prayer lives. We do not need mediators in this way of understanding God. We don't need the men or clergy or church. We simply need to turn into ourselves. And so this theology was also a testimony against dehumanization that was witnessed all around her. She believed that we were all made in the image of God. Each person, each creature has a soul of great beauty and capacity, and she taught us all through her writing how to access that. Which brings me to the third story of her life, which is the radical reforms that she moved her community through into becoming the Discalced Carmelite movement. And first of all, they were spiritual reforms. As I was saying, she taught a method of prayer that was a new method of prayer for people. She taught mental prayer to her sisters, where you could present yourself to God without mediation from church. And the church, therefore, was deeply threatened by this type of prayer because they were not necessary in this equation. They were no longer necessarily needed. And so her prayer was not compatible necessarily with the sacramental or institutional life of the church. They couldn't control it. And so this was a threat to how the Catholic Church was trying to control culture and theology. This was something that was rogue and on its own, but something that thrived as a spirituality within her own community and multiple monasteries that she founded. And the reforms that she made were not only spiritual, they were also economic in nature. She saw that the same economic divisions that existed in the society around her also existed in the monastery itself. Those with more money, the women with more money who entered, were given better rooms. They kept their family name. They did less labor in the house. Whereas women with fewer resources coming into the monastery had to do more labor, had poorer accommodations. And she saw this was inconsistent with the Christian life. And so she sought to reform it. What they ended up making in the discalced reforms was that sisters would give up their family name. They disentangled themselves from the social hierarchy that existed outside of the monastery. And everyone performed manual labor equally, and everyone was called sister. Another reform that they made was they moved from the patron system to a system of enclosure, which might not necessarily sound inherently liberatory, but I think in the way that she practiced it, it was. So in the patron system, which was how the monastery operated previous to her, they fundraised, essentially, they made their living by getting money from wealthy families, to which then the sisters were obligatory, would serve them in certain ways, would make sure that they got what they needed as well. And so this kind of tied them to the power structures outside the monastery inherently, in a way that she said would not allow them to serve God as fully as they could. And so by shifting to enclosure, where they still received money from people, but not for the patron system where they would then go out and serve these wealthy families, by shifting to enclosure, then they were more independent and on their own and not there to serve the oligarchy, but to serve God. And so in a time where there is significant around her colonization and violence enacted by the church and enacted by the state, Teresa is shifting our attention and reliance away from those institutions and into community and into ourselves in a way where I think you can look at her story and really understand the radical move that she was doing without saying specifically what it's in response to. We can see the context that created this kind of response to happen. And so the questions that Teresa invites us into. Teresa's political context was one filled with strife, yet she offered an alternative vision of society through her monasteries. How is that true for you or your community today? Some of the most significant reforms in religious life have come through economic changes. What economic reforms would revolutionize religious life today? And Teresa helped her communities so that they weren't reliant on the state nor the church in prayer nor their finances. What reforms today could open up a new era of women religious agency over their resources and decisions? So in close, we're looking at these women who were prophets in the midst of their own change of era. In the 6th century, we had Bridget, 12th century, Hildegard, 16th century, Teresa, and here we are. It's been about another 5 centuries, and many prophets are emerging in our own change of era, and I hope through this month together, you have found many more to be listening to. In close, I want to share a prayer inspired by Joan Chittister. Joan wrote a prayer for conscience and courage in times of public struggle to help remind us of this lineage of resistance that we have in our tradition. There are many names that she invokes, and using her model, I wrote this prayer for the 3 women that we've talked about today as models for this conscience and courage. Saint Bridget of Kildare, tender of the threshold, your rootedness in the land and in ritual awakens us to that which brings us most alive. Touch our conscience as we awaken to the pain of lands and of peoples. Give us the courage to act boldly for those most harmed by these histories. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, lover of Veritas, your leadership in preaching the truth and risking your own authority emboldens us to the callings which fulfill our vocation. Touch our conscience as we witness the injustices around us. Give us the courage to speak loudly and publicly on behalf of a vision where justice, where all thrive. Saint Teresa of Avila, writer of The God Within, your reforms, which renewed the tradition to its heart, return us to the heart of our tradition of religious life. Touch our conscience as we recognize what most needs changing in our hearts and communities. Give us the courage to break new paths that return us all into right relationship. May these women, their stories, and the questions they raise for us be a blessing as we are emboldened to be complicit no more and realign with Mother Law. May it be so, may we make it so. Amen. Thank you all for listening.
Amen. 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 Thank you so much, Katie. That was yeah, it was so fantastic to have these glimpses of women who subverted patriarchal authority and in the particular ways. Thank you for just weaving the particularities of how they did that. I hope everyone is feeling inspired. So feel free to shower some love for Katie in the chat, some gratitude. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we are rounding towards close, and before we do that, let's just have a moment to reflect on what Katie has been sharing with us, and what do these stories of holy resistance or these women call you into? All of us might have different relationships with the stories of these women, points of connection, points of disconnection. What do these stories call us into? And what area of our lives are they pointing for us to be more courageous in? So let's just take a moment here to reflect on that question. And if folks want to name in the chat anything that they are feeling called into, we can do that here. We've got about 3 minutes. I'm curious, we're not going to be able to hear fully from the Theological Council again, since we already did breakout groups today. But if there is anyone from the Theological Council that is like holding onto a burning ember that must be shared, something that has come up through these stories of these 3 women, I would love to give you the mic for 2 minutes or so. So Pat, Gail, Bronte, Janine, Sarah, if any of you have a quick thing, a bite-sized bit. Janine.
I'm just going to give you the bite-sized. Katie, thank you so much. And as I was listening to these amazing stories, I kind of was feeling smaller and smaller, right? Like that, oh, these are such wonderful, amazing things that these women have done. And what have I been doing? But my seed for all of us is to take the moment to actually take stock, because we see all these great things from afar, right? But these women live their lives in the day to day decisions, right? And so I just would add on to this amazing moment of kind of inspiration, the sense that we give ourselves the grace to say, yeah, we're doing this, or we're doing these things. And we might be led into something bigger as we continue to do them.
Mm. Thank you. Yeah. Pat, come on in.
Thank you so much, Katie. And I was thinking about this too with the kind of brief recap of studying what took place during the witch hunts. And I'll just say that for me, when I went into a very deep thing with the witch hunts that lasted several years. And what I came out of that really understanding the violation of the sanctity of the men, and having huge compassion and kind of understanding how, they were desperate to protect the wives, sisters, mothers, daughters in that circumstance, but the power structure itself was driving them into a certain kind of participation, even if they didn't want to. And so for me, I think that what could be powerful, because we kind of showed that these women were moving against a patriarchal system. I find things open up more when I throw out the word patriarchal. And I get in trouble for saying that sometimes, but I talk about the paradigm, the power over paradigm, and in that, genders tend to be led to behave in certain ways. But if you change the paradigm and they get a chance to participate in a different paradigm, then different aspects of gender come forward, right? And different ways, medicines, I'll even say, come forward. And so as we begin to co-create a vision of a different structure, I would encourage us to be open to the way that that's going to shift all the roles, and for us to have empathy and flexibility in that. And I was just really struck by thinking about what these women were working with, and now what we're working with, and even considering the Pope of today, and Jesus, for that matter. There's been men all along who have not been particularly thrilled with this. So patriarchal structure or power over structure, maybe just we're going to propose a different paradigm, and that's going to be very powerful. Yeah.
Sarah, you're muted.
Oh,
Sarah.
thanks. Thank you. Just to add to that, each of the women mentioned was really sourcing their sense of power and particularly security from their relationship with their experience of the divine. And what I find that as people are trying to untangle from the doctrine of discovery, you have to resource your sense of security into something that's not the code of domination, which gives the illusion of security for particularly people of European descent and with pale colored skin today. And so you had to like that part of what this example is one of refoundation, sourcing the sense of foundation so that it is not so dependent upon what Pat is beautifully calling the power over paradigm. And I also just want to add that there's many resources for that outside of both within and outside the church, and looking into foodways, revitalizing circular calendar systems, revitalizing feast days, and looking at like the huge diversity of ways in which you can engage with the multiplicity of what you have inherited that is not necessarily what you think it is.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we need to be finding all sorts of anchors as we do this work in prayer and ritual. Thank you, Katie, for those beautiful reflections that help us anchor ourselves, but also in our relationship with the divine, in our relationship with earth, in our relationship with community. So we will be hopefully getting into a lot more of what we can be anchoring in. in the next session, as well as in the praxis sessions coming up. So with that, I'm going to invite Amy to put up some of our slides real quick. Also, just thank you to the chat for those who've shared how they are called, how they're being called by these stories. I was reading them and they're really powerful. So just want you to know, if you're not being ignored, we just don't have very much time. But thank you so much. So next week, we are going to be blessed with, oh, I think this might not be showing up for everyone, Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, who will be talking with us about what it means to remother the world, remother our theology. And we're going to be going deep into the Magnificat, the ancient flip the tables over song and prayer honoring the mystery of Mother Mary and birth, and what that tells us about our role in this moment and what it means to upend empire and be in the service of life. So we are going to be with her next week. After that, 1 week later, we will be in a pop-up extra praxis session. It'll just be 1 hour long. That is basically just for dialogue, for small groups and large groups. This is for us to start moving into how are we applying this to our own life? What is bubbling up in terms of action we can take, commitments we can find ourselves living into. What are our ideas for this Complicit No More movement? As well as space for those who just want to be digesting the last 6 sessions, this whole series, and what the content brings up in us. So all of those things can be cared for in these small group discussions. People will be able to choose their own adventure. And then 2 weeks later, we will wrap. We will wrap this foundational series for Motherhouse with Michelle Shenandoah, and we will be talking about what this moment in the movement means and what it means to be starting this movement of Complicit No More with right action. So that will be October 28th from 4 to 6 Eastern, and the pop-up small group discussions will be October 14th. So those are the things coming up next. In terms of homework, for those who've been able to do the homework, I think it's been really wonderful to hear your responses. This week, we invite you to connect with a holy resistance ancestor. So to find an ancestor in your lineage by blood or faith or identity, maybe it's your movement tradition, who resisted empire and that you'd like to learn more about. And we invite you to get started in learning about them. And then after doing a little bit of digging, engage with them, write them a letter, read their original writings, maybe put something on your altar or in a visible space that reminds you of them and calls in their spirit and their energy into your life. So that is our invitation for what to do this week at home. As usual, you can find everything you need at the Motherhouse course website. And lastly, we'll just close. We have about a minute left. And I'm going to come off of being spotlit and look at you all. There we go. Hello. I am going to close us out with this prayer from Teresa of Avila. It's a short prayer, and just invite you to feel the earth beneath your feet, the seat, your seat in your chair. Feel your width, feel your length, your dignity, feel your depth, the lineage of time that you are positioned in. And we pray, O God, grant that in all things, great and small, today and all the days of my life, I may do whatever you require of me. Help me respond to the slightest prompting of your grace, so that I may be your trustworthy instrument for your honor. May your will be done in time and in eternity, by me, in me, and through me. Amen. All right, y'all, that is this week. Feel free to come off mute and say goodbye, and we will see you soon.